Hello, my name is Joshua Mugabi. I welcome you to topic 10.2, Sexual Reproduction in Plants. Learning outcome B. Know the processes of pollination, fertilization, and fruit formation. Our learning activity in groups or pairs, learners examine specimens and all diagrams of insect-pollinated flowers, research using different sources, and then discuss the meaning of the term pollination and how pollination takes place, how fertilization takes place, how seeds and fruits develop. Individuals provide annotated diagrams explaining these processes. Let's start. Pollination, fertilization, and fruit. Item 1. We're going to emphasize on insect-pollinated flowers. Learners go outside to observe hibiscus, sunflower, passion fruit, and other insect-pollinated flowers. They watch bees, butterflies, and beetles visiting flowers. Task. Define pollination. Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of what? Of a flower. That is pollination. Transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma of a flower. It may occur within the same flower or between flowers of the same species. Describe how pollination occurs in insect-pollinated flowers. Flowers are brightly colored and scented to attract insects. They have nectar guides which leads insects to nectar. When an insect lands on the flower, it collects nectar. Pollen sticks on its body. Now here, when you look at the flower here, you can see that the flower is brightly colored, meaning that this is an insect-pollinated flower. This color attracts the insect. Now, inside there, that's where we find the nectar. But these lines that you see on the flower, those lines going up, down, those are the ones that we call the nectar guides. And what is their purpose? They lead the insect to the nectar. When the insect lands here, it will just follow that line. That line is leading it to the point where there is a nectar. And when the insect lands on the flower to collect nectar, pollen sticks, this pollen here on the anther heads will stick on the body of the insect. The insect flies to another flower where some of the pollen rubs onto the sticky stigma. So this insect, which is coming from another flower, it will fly and come to this stigma here. And as it rubs onto the sticky stigma, the pollen it collected from another flower will attach itself on this sticky stigma. The pollen grains, they will germinate on the stigma to begin fertilization. So when the pollen has landed here, like the way we are seeing it here, now this is our stigma, it lands here, it will start germinating, forming the pollen tube to begin the process of fertilization. Explain the process of fertilization in flowering plants. A pollen grain on the stigma germinates to form a pollen tube. So what we are seeing here, this is our pollen grain, which has landed on the stigma. It starts germinating and it forms this growing tube. This growing tube is what we call the pollen tube, which grows through the style. The pollen tube grows down the style to reach the ovary. So our pollen tube here will start growing through the style, going down until when it reaches the ovary. Our ovary here. It reaches the ovary that side down. The male nucleus moves down the tube to the ovary. Now, when we try to identify here we are having our pollen grain landing onto the stigma. And when it lands onto the stigma, it starts germinating. And that is the germinating, it is growing down in form of a pollen tube. Now the pollen tube, as it grows down, it is going to have the male gametes with it, which we are seeing here, the male gametes. Now those male gametes are moving towards the ovule. The male nucleus fuses with the egg cell, which is the female nucleus, inside the ovule. So when the male nucleus comes here, there is the egg cell here. They are going to fuse together. The male nucleus here will fuse with the egg cell here, and then these ones are in the ovule. This fusion of this forms a zygote, completing fertilization. The fusion forms a zygote completing fertilization. So when this male nucleus comes and fuses with this egg cell here, we form now what we call a zygote. We have formed what we are calling a zygote, completing fertilization. Using their observation, explain how the seeds and the fruits develop after fertilization. After fertilization, the zygote divides to form the embryo. So we saw that fertilization took place inside the ovule, in the ovary. After the zygote has been formed, it divides and then it forms what we call the zygote. Now, the ovule develops into a seed. Now, what we had as the ovules inside here, ovules, these small ones that you are seeing, those small ones, they develop into what we call now the seeds here. The ovules turn into the seeds. The seeds that we are seeing here, they were once ovules. Now they have turned into a seed. The ovary develops into a fruit. So our ovary, the whole of this one here, which inside has got the ovules which are turning into a fruit, a seeds. The whole of the ovary, it is now what turns into the whole of this fruit. This fruit, the ovary here turns into our fruit. The ovary wall becomes the pellicle, what we call the fruit wall. That is the ovary wall. The wall of the ovary, this outer part of the wall of the ovary, is what is going to turn into this wall of the fruit. That wall of the fruit is what we call the pellicle. The seed now develops a seed coat, embryo, and stored food. So our seed that has been formed in the ovary after fertilization or fusion of the male gamete with the egg cell, they turn into seeds. Then the seed develops a seed coat, this outer layer. The seed develops what we call the seed coat, the outer layer. And it also develops what we call the embryo. The embryo is what we call the radicle and the prunule. That is the embryo. And then it also develops the stored food, which is now the cotyledon, where the food is stored. That is the seed. Okay. Now here we say the surrounding flower parts, and those are the petals, the stigma, all of them, they wither and fall off in many species. So when you look at this flower here, it has got the ovary. But we say the ovary is going to turn into a fruit. But on top, it had the style and the stigma. And on the sides, it had the flowers, the petals. So what happens is that these surrounding parts of the flower, they are going to wither and fall off. The petals will fall off. And when the petals fall off, we remain with only the fruit, with the sepals which are down here, but the petals have fallen off because they have withered. Now the style and the stigma, they also wither and they also fall off. So we remain with this scar here. That one was the ovary which turned into the fruit. On top of the ovary, there was the style and the stigma. Those ones withered and they fall off. Then we remain with this scar here, where there was the style and the stigma, but they have fallen off. And we remain only with the sepals. Sepals remain, but the petals fall off. Insect pollinated flowers, item 2. We are looking at laboratory observation. Learners work in pairs to dissect hibiscus flowers. They identify the stigma, the style, anthers, ovary, and the ovule. So we have our hibiscus flower here. We can look at it and we try to identify the stigma, the style, the anthers, ovary, and the ovules. Task: identify and label the floral part involved in pollination and fertilization. We need only the floral parts. We need the floral parts involved in pollination and fertilization. Now here we have our flower, which is fully labeled, but they have told us we only need the floral parts that are involved in pollination and the fertilization. So let us try to eliminate other parts that are not part of these floral parts. Now when we cover our flower, we shall see that those floral parts includes the anther, the anthers which we have here. These are our anthers. It has got the stigma. Our stigma is here. It has the style. This is the style. It has got the ovary which is here. And then it has the ovules which are inside the ovary. Those are the floral parts that are involved in pollination and fertilization. Explain how the structure of insect-pollinated flowers is adapted for pollination. They are brightly colored petals which attract insects. When you look at the insect-pollinated flowers, you will see that they have colored petals, and these ones are mainly to attract the insects. The nectar glands provide rewards, and when you go down the flower, this side down inside, you will find there the nectar glands, which will act or provide nectar to the plant or to the insects which have carried out pollination. The sticky stigma, that one traps pollen. So it has the sticky stigma. The stigma here is sticky. It attracts or traps pollen, which is from an incoming insect. Anthers are positioned so insect easily touch them. Now, when you look at these anthers, the way they are positioned, they can easily be touched by the insect. When the insect comes flying, it lands on the stigma. And when it lands on the stigma, it moves downwards to go and collect nectar. As it is moving downward, it rubs with the anther heads. And as it is rubbing with the anther heads, as it is going down, it is picking pollen. And also when it is coming out, fly away, it rubs still with the pollen and picks the pollen from the anther, and then it goes away. So the anthers are positioned so that the insect easily touches them. Then the pollen grains, they are large, spiky, and sticky to attach onto the insect body. So this pollen, which is on the anther head, is very large and spiky and sticky so that it can attach itself on the insect body. Draw an annotated diagram showing pollen tube formation. So when we draw an annotated diagram showing pollen tube formation, it is going to form on the stigma. When the insect lands on the stigma, it rubs here pollen grain. And when the pollen grain is rubbed on top of the stigma, it develops or it germinates and it develops what we call a pollen tube. Now a pollen tube passes through the style, moving towards the ovule through the ovary. And what is in the pollen tube? They are the sperm cells or the male gametes, which are being taken to the ovule to find there the egg cell to fertilize, and then the opolar nuclei. Explain how fruit formation benefits the plant. The fruit protects the developing seeds. So when we have a fruit which is formed, its purpose is to protect the seeds that are developing inside here. So one of the major purposes of the fruit is to protect the developing seeds inside the fruit. The fruit aids seed dispersal with animals and wind and water. So the fruit is going to help the dispersal or the movement of these seeds from one place to another. How? By it being carried. If it is carried, it attracts the dispersers. Animals will come and eat this fruit, and when they eat this fruit, now they will transfer the seed from the parent area to another area. The fruit may attract animals which disperse the seeds after feeding. Insect pollinated flower, item 3. Using charts and diagrams. Groups examine charts showing pollination, pollen tubes growth, and seed fruit development. Task: summarize the major steps from pollination to seed formation. Pollen lands on the stigma. So we are seeing here pollen landing onto the stigma. When it has finished landing on the stigma, what happens? The pollen tube grows down the style. As you are seeing here, the pollen tube will grow down the style to the ovary. Then the male nucleus will fuse with the egg cell, what we call fertilization. Our male nuclei, these are the sperm cells that are in the pollen tube. So when they come inside, one male nuclei will fuse with the egg cell, and that process will be called fertilization. Then this second nuclei, male nuclei, will fuse with the two polar nuclei to form the endosperm, and then we form what we call double fertilization. Zygote forms and develops into an embryo. Now let us go back here and we understand. Remember, we had our pollen tube coming downwards, and the pollen tube had the sperm cells. We say the first sperm cell comes and fertilizes or fuses with the egg cell. And when it fuses with the egg cell here, now that part is going to turn into what we call a zygote. So that one is the one that is going to form our zygote. The fusion of the first sperm cell with the egg cell will form our zygote. Are we together? And then if the second comes, the second nuclei here, male nuclei, will come and fuse with these two polar bodies here. Now those two polar bodies here, after fusing, form a triploid. They will turn into what we call the endo or a cotyledon. Endoderm. Are we together? They will turn into what we call the endoderm. And then now, what is going to happen? This one, which we have said as a zygote, is going to develop into what we call the embryo. The embryo, that is what we call the plumule and the radicle. They will develop from the egg cell fusing with the first sperm cell. Then the cotyledon is going to come from the fusion of the second sperm cell with the two polar nuclei, then we form what we call the endoderm. And that one maybe turns into the cotyledon. So what is going to happen is that the ovule will become now a seed, and the ovary will become a fruit. So we have the whole of this structure here, the whole of this structure which you are seeing inside here, the whole of that one is the ovule, and that ovule there is going to turn into what we call the seed. The ovule will turn into our seed there. Okay, then we have the whole of this one here. All of this one, we were calling it the ovary. That all of it is what we are calling the ovary. Now that ovary is what is going to turn into what we call a fruit. So that is how fertilization is taking place. Produce an illustrated diagram showing fertilization. So we have our full diagram here, which summarizes the whole of the process up to fertilization. Let us try to go through. We have here our pollen, which is coming, and when that pollen comes, it lands onto the stigma. When it lands onto the stigma, it will now start to germinate. You can see it here, starting to germinate from the pollen into the pollen tube. Then that pollen tube will start moving downwards into the style. And where is it going? It is going towards the ovary. It will pass through here like this, the ovary, and it is coming this side so that it can enter into the ovule. So when it passes through the ovary, it will now enter into the ovary here from the style. It will go down into the ovary and it enters through this point here. Now when it enters this point here, we said one of the male nuclei will fuse with the egg cell to form the zygote, and then another one will fuse with the polar body to form what we call the endosperm. Now we have said that after forming the zygote here, now this zygote here is what is formed here after the fusion of the male gamete with the egg cell. And this one here, it has formed what we call the endosperm. Now the whole of this one here becomes now what we call the seed. That is now what we are referring to as double fertilization. Why double fertilization? There was one male nuclei which fused with the egg cell to form the zygote, which turns into the embryo, and the second male nuclei fused with the polar nuclei here, and those ones, they turned into what we call the endosperm. That is what we call double fertilization. Explain why pollination is necessary before fertilization. Pollination brings the male gamete or the pollen to the stigma. So we say that before fertilization takes place, pollination is the one that comes first. The transfer of the pollen grain from the anthers to the stigma. So pollination brings about the male gamete or the pollen to the stigma. Without pollen, no pollen tube can form. So fertilization cannot occur. So if we don't have pollen, then there will be no pollen tube. And if there is no pollen tube, then we don't expect fertilization to take place. Insect pollinated flowers, item 4. Annotated diagram. Each learner produces a fully labeled illustration showing pollination, pollen tube formation, fertilization, seed and fruit development. Task: draw and annotate each stage from pollination to fruit formation. So here we are summarizing. This is our pollen grain landing onto the stigma. After landing onto the stigma, it germinates to form the pollen tube, and the pollen tube has the sperm cells and the tube cell nuclei. The pollen tube grows through the style, taking the tube cell in front and the sperm cells behind. It grows through the ovary, going towards the ovule. When it reaches the ovule, one of the male nuclei fuses with the egg cell to form a zygote, and the second fuses with the two polar nuclei, and they end up forming an endosperm, and then we also form a zygote. Explain the biological importance of fertilization. Fertilization ensures formation of a zygote, which develops into a new plant. It restores diploid number of chromosomes. It leads to the formation of seeds, enabling species continuity. Summary. Look at our summary. Pollination enables the transfer of the male gamete. Fertilization ensures fusion of gametes, which leads to seed formation. Seeds and fruits, these develop from the ovule and the ovary respectively. Insect pollinated flowers are specially adapted with bright petals, scent, nectar, and sticky pollen, and these attract insects. These processes ensure sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Thank you very much for participating in topic 10.2, sexual reproduction in plants. We have been looking at the learning outcome B. Know the processes of pollination, fertilization, and fruit formation. We have been looking at learning activity, which we were focusing on, in groups or pairs. Learners examine specimens and or diagrams of insect-pollinated flowers. Research using different sources and then discuss the meaning of the term pollination and how pollination takes place, how fertilization takes place, how seeds, fruits develop. Then individuals produce annotated diagrams explaining these processes. Thank you for participating. Please visit me at Mugabi Joshua Biology on YouTube. Please don't forget to like, to share, and subscribe.